damning report by Attorney General Letitia James on the sexual harassment allegations against Governor Andrew Cuomo, saying the governor sexually harassed state workers and others on multiple occasions. But the Attorney General isn't pursuing charges against Cuomo, and he maintains his innocence, refusing to resign.
Lawmakers now considering the option to impeach the governor, a process that begins with an Assembly Judiciary Committee investigation now underway. Joining us right now, one of the members of the committee that will decide the fate of Governor Cuomo, Westchester Assemblyman Tom Abinanti. Nice to have you on Good Day New York.
Good morning. Nice to be with you this morning.
So, Assemblyman, what has taken place over the last 24 hours? What do we need to know?
Well, as you rightfully pointed out, the Attorney General came out with a very, very strong report and a very, very coherent narrative of what has been going on in the governor's office for the last several years. She confirmed that all of the evidence that she and her team have seen supports the allegations by the women. And she basically said, here it is, go do with it as you please, to us and to the prosecutors who have jurisdiction over the different acts that were described in the report. Now, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, I am constrained from commenting on the merits of the Attorney General's report or the merits of any of the allegations. My colleagues have been very clear. They are reflecting the view of a large part of the New York electorate that the governor needs to resign, that the governor needs to go and can no longer govern. We on the Judiciary Committee are going to be meeting on Monday. It is expected that we will all have carefully studied the Attorney General's report. We will be meeting with our lawyers on Monday, discuss with them whether the report conforms to the information that they have gleaned from their investigation. And then at that point, we'll discuss what are the next steps. Do we need more information? Do we need to discuss some of the details with some witnesses? Do we need to review some documents that the Attorney General referred to? These are all the types of questions we're going to have to discuss.
So, Assemblyman, let me ask you something. The governor has called this investigation biased, and sources are telling me this morning he's holding a press conference and he's going to take questions from the media, hoping to change the narrative. Is there anything that he can say that might sway you?
Well, I can't say right now on the base. I can't comment on the merits. But you just made the point that I was trying to make. We need to give fair deference to the governor's arguments, and we need to look very carefully at what our lawyers have found and what the Attorney General is alleging. And that's what we're going to do as a committee. We don't have the luxury of commenting in public. I can see on Twitter already people are commenting, where's Abinanti? Why isn't he saying something? Well, I've been charged with my other colleagues on the Judiciary Committee to act like judges. We can't comment until we've seen all of the evidence, we've heard the governor's arguments, and we've evaluated it all. Remember that what our charge is to draft articles of impeachment if we deem it to be appropriate. So we've got to take all of this, convert it to a legal document, and then determine whether we can actually present a winning case before a jury, which is the New York State Senate and the Court of Appeals judges. So it's a very different task than those who are out commenting on the Attorney General's report. It's basically told us that we can't talk. We've got to go through a legal process. There will be a time when we get to speak, and that will be when we make our determination. And remember, we have 4 other charges, not just this one.
Well, while we are talking about this one, I know you can't speak on specifics, but just talk to the average viewer about what will fall and deem under appropriate terms to move forward with impeachment then, if that is the case.
As I said, we've got to analyze what the Attorney General has given us and determine, is there enough evidence to support the narrative she's put forward.
How much is enough
It's a
evidence?
very strong report. It's a very condemning report. The governor is still claiming he's innocent. He didn't do these things. So it's going to be up to us to analyze step by step, piece by piece. Can we prove what the Attorney General is saying is the fact in her report? And that's what our lawyers and our committee is going to be discussing on Monday. Can we take all of this, put it together in a coherent case, and present like a prosecutor in a trial, and then withstand the arguments that the high-priced lawyers that the governor has hired are going to make? So we are, in effect, like a U.S. attorney, like a district attorney. We're trying to look at this and say, can we put together a case? If we can put together a case, we're obligated to present articles of impeachment.
So if you're talking about a case,
then we can't go forward.
Of course, but if you're talking about this, I want to just looking at some of the stuff online. A lawyer that represented several women in sexual misconduct cases is saying that Governor Cuomo could be held individually liable in state civil court, but a criminal charge could be difficult for prosecutors to prove. Now, if you're saying that you're going to act like someone that's in court, is that true? Well,
we don't have the burden of a criminal prosecutor, which is beyond the reasonable doubt. We just have to convince the court of impeachment, which is the Senate and the Court of Appeals, beyond a certain standard. We're still waiting for our lawyers to tell us what is that standard. We have not yet had there have not been a lot of impeachment cases in New York. We know for a fact it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what a criminal prosecutor would have to prove.
Right, you're going to have no real precedent to fall back on. But also, I'm wondering, Assemblyman, I mean, back in March, you called for the governor to resign. So does that kind of cloud your, impartiality? No,
what I was saying was what many of my colleagues right now are saying, is that this governor cannot govern. That's a very different question than the impeachment question, which is saying that he has committed such horrendous acts that he should be removed from office. That's why those of us on the judiciary are being so cautious in speaking about the merits.
Gotcha. Okay.
I have not changed my position. I believe that the events since I called for his resignation have made it even clearer that he should be resigning. But that doesn't mean that we're going to find grounds for impeachment. I'm being very careful on that. The Attorney General presented a very strong case. And now it's our job to be able to fashion that into a presentation which constitutes an indictment, in effect, of the governor. And if we can do that, we've got an obligation, in my mind, to impeach him. If we can't do that, then we have to report to the full assembly that we cannot, no matter how damning the report is, that we cannot impeach him. Well, so that's the task before us. And as I said, we have other charges as well. Let's not forget about the nursing home actions that the governor took. Let's not forget about the questions around the safety of the Mario Cuomo Bridge. Let's not forget about the allegations that he misused members of the state workforce to benefit himself in writing his book. So we have a major task ahead of us. And we have to decide, are any of those significant enough to impeach him? Should some of them be dropped? Should we be concentrating? We've got a lot of questions. I don't think the public understands the magnitude of the issues that are facing us. And they're not all just a question of did he do it or didn't he do it? It's a question of can you prove it?
All right.
And that's what we have to look at.
It sounds like you got a lot of work ahead of you. You think you're going to get it all done before the end of his term?
Oh, I'm hopeful that we're going to get it done in a few weeks.
Okay.
We're all lawyers except one member. So we've been through this before. I've tried many cases in the past. I understand what it takes to present a case and also what it takes to punch holes in cases.
Yeah.
So we've got to look to see, does the governor have a valid defense to any of the allegations? And if not, do the allegations by themselves support an impeachment article?
Thank you.
And if they do, like I said, we then have an obligation to present those articles to the full assembly and convince the assembly they should vote yes. If we do not have the basis for the articles, then we're going to have to report to the full assembly.
Assemblyman, it sounds like you still got a whole lot of work on your hands. We want to let you get started on that.
I know. Good luck. Assemblyman and member of the Assembly Judiciary Committee, Tom Abinanti.